the revolution is not going to happen if you cannot explain to your everyday American what the context and the situation of the revolution actually is. Like, hey, what's up, y'all? This is Jacob. Welcome back to Sunday Yap Session, the show where every Sunday I hop on here and yap at you all about something with some sort of cohesive through line to carry us through, and sometimes we do better than others. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a like because that helps me out quite a bit. And if you want to come and yap with me every single Sunday, be sure to hit that subscribe button because I upload at least once a week and sometimes more. Tangerine LaCroix today. Let's get into it today. And y'all, I know exactly what I want to talk about today. I've been like ruminating about this for days, so I kind of just want to get this out. We'll see how cohesive this is. Today I want to talk about leftist online discourse and a lot of like the communication issues I'm seeing, and also just the trend I'm noticing of a lot of discourse somehow being pitted on leftists within like TikTok, online spaces, so on and so forth. Some of the communication issues I'm seeing and just places where we could improve and do better, so on and so forth. I think if you have been on like the black side of TikTok lately, largely kind of the thing that sparked all of this was the whole Beyoncé propaganda, Beyonce's civil war discourse that like started in a really interesting place, and I think started with a really interesting conversation around like American iconography, what is propaganda, so on and so forth. And I'm not gonna rehash the entire discourse here. This is not like a discourse summary. If you haven't heard about this and kind of want to get caught up on what happened, there's a really good video by a TikTok creator named Christina that I'll link below. It's a very like comedic summary of everything that happened, and we'll just leave it at that. This is one where y'all are just gonna have to do your own research and kind of understand the conversation. But a lot of the things that got sparked were like conversations, like I said, around propaganda, you know, the difference between like American iconography and like Southern Texan culture, so on and so forth. And I think there was a very interesting conversation that could have been had, and I think there were a lot of interesting conversations that were had. I don't think this is purely just like a dramatic, wild discourse like a lot of people are talking about it. However, the plot in that discourse got lost very, very fast, and I think as a result of that, on top of the mountain of other sub-conversations that came out of that, one of the things that I kept hearing and seeing was like, oh, like leftists don't know how to talk to people. There's a communication issue. Like all y'all want to do is fight and be morally superior and blah, 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 blah. And like, I don't think that this all is to be pinned on leftists. I think it's actually quite unfair to pin it all on leftists when there were so many other people that were a part of that conversation, and largely too the audiences that were eating this drama up and egging people on and things like that. So like, I think leftists somehow getting like pinned as being the problem in this is kind of weird, but it is something that I have wanted to talk about, so I kind of want to jump into that. A couple disclaimers before we get into this though. Like, I am largely just talking about like online leftist culture. I think as someone who, you know, is actually out in these streets doing things offline and like making a real difference in my tangible in-person community, I know that like the experience of interacting with leftists, and I would consider myself a leftist. I don't really have like a particular political label that I put on myself, but like if I had to pick one, that would be probably the closest thing. So like, this is me speaking as someone who's probably part of some of these problems too, but like obviously the online experience versus like people actually in real life is vastly different. And like just with like any other social media like TikTok, YouTube, so on and so forth, you are seeing a very thin facet of a lot of people's lives, and like TikTok loves to encourage like drama and messiness and things like that. So like, of course the content you're gonna see on there is a little bit more messy. I want to make it clear too, like I'm talking about things like I have probably personally done and experienced too. So like, this is not me like looking at leftists be like, y'all have problems and you need to fix them. Like, this is something I'm speaking to as someone in this community, as someone who is making content online and trying to change minds and trying to educate people about things like that. And I guess we'll kind of start there because I think that's kind of where things get a little tricky, because I think there are a lot of like alcoves of the internet that kind of get lumped into this leftist space. Like you've got like kind of just the straight up leftists that are talking about like political content and thing like that. But then you also kind of have like Yapper talk and like the Yappers. And I feel like that's kind of more, that's kind of the land I like to live in the space I like to occupy. And then you have like pure activists that are talking about specific like political advocacy things, stuff like that. And then I think you just have a lot of people that like are leftists that just make like entertaining content, and somehow they're kind of lumped into these things. So I think like it is just like out of the gate unfair to like be like all of you leftists, like I don't know, like the line between educator and just like general influencer who just wants to like talk about things and yap kind of gets like blurred. And I think this Beyonce discourse is a really great example of that, because I think in these spaces, as someone who's like in these spaces a lot, there are a lot of conversations about like audience comprehension, and like it's very easy to like go into a conversation and see people talking about, you know, media literacy being dead, and you know, like the bean soupification, people wanting like content very specifically curated and catered to them. We talk a lot about how like literacy rates is just like not super great. I think a lot of the studies we have indicate that the average American has a 6th to 8th grade reading level, and like all these sort of things that kind of indicate just like the American general level of comprehension. And so I see these conversations and I know that like everybody that's kind of in my circles knows these things. And then so when I see sort of things happen where it is very clearly like, I think in the Beyoncé discourse, for example, and like this is not me taking a side, I think there were a lot of interesting conversations on both sides. So like I'm not trying to resurrect the war. I just want to analyze what happened. I think like the video that kind of like launched all of this was Hannah's video talking about like Beyoncé being a propagandist. I think the use of the word propaganda was really interesting because like I was saying, we know that like all these people have like different levels of comprehension, media literacy, so on and so forth. So like if we're using like charged words like propaganda, I think that like inherently means something negative to a lot of people. And I think that was kind of where a lot of this discourse kind of like lost the plot, because then it ended up being like textbook definition versus colloquial definition of propaganda, and like stuff like that I feel like happens a lot where like creators will speak about things, and I've probably done this too, like speaking about things at kind of like the comprehension and understanding level of like someone who was college educated or has read a lot of political theory, things like that. That makes sense just based on like our demographics of like voter data and things like that. Like the more liberal you are, it tends to have more of an association with like having a college degree, having access to these sort of materials, and like there's a whole other conversation about like capitalism and like who has access to sort of these things. So like we're not gonna go on the whole tangent, but like I think what I'm trying to say is like things will get said in a certain way, and I think knowing what we know about audiences, if we are trying to change people's minds, sometimes like the way things are presented and the way words are chosen and the way ideas are sort of expressed gets a little confusing to me, because I think as someone who studied public relations, which is just like the rebranding of propaganda after that word kind of like had a negative association, like if we're gonna use that, there needs to be a very specific context provided talking about like the pure textbook definition of propaganda and not like the inherently like negative association that's so common with the word propaganda. I don't know, I'm having a hard time kind of like coming up with how exactly I want to talk about this, because it ends up like being kind of like this catch-22 of like, I don't want to necessarily suggest that people should have to like water things down or like oversimplify sort of things, but when it comes to content where you're like trying to explain new concepts and explain things to people, like I think the way it's packaged is very important, and I think that's like sort of an issue I have with a lot of these spaces. I think like in the COVID conscious community, we'll pivot a little bit. I see this sort of stuff like all the time, and that's a less hot drama topic, so we'll talk about that. Like I'm in like these COVID conscious spaces, and I've made a lot of content talking about COVID and just why that's important and why we should still be masking and care about that and so on and so forth. And then I'll like go on Instagram, and like this is no shade to anybody, but I'm seeing these like 15 Instagram slide infographics just like full of jargon and talking about like revolutionary community care praxis, blah blah blah, 5 different scientific terms talking about like COVID spread and things like that, especially if we're making this content for people that may not know so much about these topics or things like that. That's what I'm trying to say. Like the language sometimes it's used is like a lot of language a lot of times that only the people that are in these spaces are really gonna know. So sometimes it makes me wonder like what is the point of the content, if that makes sense, if you're not packaging this and kind of explaining it in a way that the average American is going to understand, the average American who may not be informed about like certain leftist political issue or COVID or whatever kind of thing you're advocating for. Like sometimes it feels like this content is being made more to like speak to people that are already informed and kind of just be like this self-confirmation sort of thing, if that makes sense. And that's why I try to approach things like so conversationally. Like if you look at a lot of my COVID content, like a lot of it is just me like turning on the camera and just talking, and I try to use like as much plain language as possible and like not get too in the weeds about the jargon and things like that, because I am actually interested in like changing people's mind and connecting with people that may like not have that sort of understanding of things that are like very blatant to me just because I've been so deep in them. And that's something I've tried to do throughout like a lot of my life, just like academically, interpersonally, things like that. Like I get really turned off by people that like seem to have all of this sort of knowledge about things and like are deep in all this jargon, but like can't explain it to people in a way that like is actually accessible. And I thought about making an entire video about this and I never got around to it. And I guess this is like the video that I've been meaning to make. Like I see all these conversations about like people wanting to do revolutionary action and like the revolution is coming, and like so many people like do truly believe this and are truly like invested in it, but like are so deep in it that they're not even thinking about like how they're gonna communicate. The revolution is not gonna happen if you cannot explain to your everyday American what the context and the situation of the revolution actually is. Like that kind of makes sense. Like I don't know, it seems like sometimes like people turn on the camera like just to hear themselves talk, and it's more of like a monologue rather than like any sort of actual good faith engagement with people and trying to change people's minds and things like that. So much much ego ends up getting involved too. And like a lot of times what starts out as a very interesting conversation and something that we could all actually benefit and learn from just turns into kind of like almost like a competition. Like I see these kind of conversations and sometimes I see people making videos and it seems more like people are making videos and talking about it as if they're trying to like win a debate rather than like actually build any sort of like collective understanding. I don't know. It's like, I was talking to some of my mutuals in a TikTok live. I was Kenny, Steven, Mattiswan on here, which I'm sure y'all are familiar with some of those people. And Mattiswan brought up a really good point where she was talking about like, I think a lot of like this discourse in particular, and like a lot of the discourses that we've been having online, because like a lot of the TikTok discourse in particular has just gotten like so heated and so nasty so fast. And she made a really good observation that she thinks a lot of this is just like residual anger from the way like the election went and like the kind of dichotomy between like people that were making content being like pro voting for Kamala and people that were like advocating for not voting at all and so on and so forth. And like I think that is really true, because if you kind of look at it through that lens, a lot of the kind of lines that were drawn in that discourse were very similar sort of things. And I guess that kind of like as part of it too, like the communications things, talking about like what I was saying earlier about how it seems like sometimes people kind of just want to win these discussions and not have any sort of like actual discourse or conversation about things. I don't know. I think like things get like almost carceral in a way too. Like someone has one bag take and suddenly they're like the worst person ever and they need to be canceled. And like anytime they want to speak on anything else, it's not like, let's analyze what they're saying right now. It's like, oh, well, you had a bad take 3 weeks ago. So like, you can't be part of this conversation. Like get out. Like it just ends up getting so messy. And I think there are like times and places where like people do things that are like so far gone that like, obviously you don't want to end the conversation, or like they've harmed so many people that it really needs to be like a step back and think sort of thing. But I really do think a lot of times like in these spaces, it is truly just like you had a bad take once and it wasn't anything like particularly horrible. It's just like, I don't like what you said, and therefore like anything you will say or have said before is like somehow useless. And I definitely do see that a lot, which is especially goofy too in these spaces where there's so much talk about like building community and like mutual aid and things like that. Like it is a very much just like weird online sort of carceral thinking that I think is really telling a lot of times like who was actually out in the world like doing things and who was purely just doing this online. Because like in real life, you're gonna have to work with a lot of people that you may not see fully eye to eye with, or like you might disagree on quite a bit with, but like a lot of times you'll have the same end goal. And I think in real life, these things end up being a lot more smoother than they are online. Like, I don't know, there's like a lot less like diplomacy, I feel sometimes in these online sort of conversations. And I guess that's kind of like inherent with the medium too, because largely like a lot of these videos too, like myself included, like a lot of these things really are kind of like edutainment, I would say, more than like pure education a lot of times. Like, I don't know, that's a tangent. We'll get into that another time, but like there is kind of this like interesting line of like, what is the end goal of this content? What do you want people to get out of these sort of things? And like, I think sometimes it is a lot of ego, a lot of I want to be right, a lot of like I just want to dunk on somebody, and like not actually a lot of like interest in changing people's minds. And it's more just like, this was funny, or just people inserting themselves into conversations like purely just like dunk on somebody and make a point and like not actually build any sort of interesting conversations. There was one video in particular on TikTok that I stitched a while ago, and like y'all can look at my stitches and see, I don't even exactly remember what it was. Oh yeah, somebody made a video and they were like, why is it when like white men get together, they like form like alt-right groups and go down like manospheres and things like that, but when like black men get together, they start like free lunch programs from the Black Panthers and things like that. And like I ended up like stitching them, just being like, hey, there's this whole like black manosphere that exists, and also like a lot of the Black Panther free lunch program was pioneered by black women, so that feels weird that you're like erasing their contribution. And they ended up like commenting on the video and being like, yeah, I kind of just wanted to make like white conservatives angry, and like I know about all that stuff. And I'm like, and you felt like you needed to use like black people and minimize their experiences to do that? And it's like that kind of stuff. It's like people will make these sort of points trying to like make some hot take or make some sort of point, and like don't really care about like the collateral damage. And I feel like a lot of times like aren't even actually like engaging in the conversation to actually engage in the conversation. They just want to like piss people off, a lot of times like at the expense of other people. I see that with like white leftists on TikTok a lot, and it's like really, really annoying. And I think there is probably something to be said about like, is TikTok a great place for these conversations in the first place? Like if we are truly trying to like change minds and things like that, but also like you got to meet people where you're at. So like, I don't know. I think the platform itself does like encourage a lot of these issues too, because like with TikTok, you only have like so long before people stop paying attention. Like your videos aren't going to get pushed out, and like you have to like engage people with like a really quick engaging hook that like a lot of times is just inciting people's anger to kind of get them to lock in. And like I feel feel like what used to be like hooks and kind of like how you would treat like a headline is now just like sensationalism and just saying something like outlandish or wild or something that like is gonna piss people off to get people to watch the whole video, and like there might be a nuanced take in the actual video itself, but like because the way the platform like rewards inciting anger and things like that, like I've seen that like definitely a lot of times, and I wish more people would be like more honest about that as well. Like, 'cause I think sometimes these discourses will happen, like I'm just talking like broadly at this point, but like someone will say like the most out of pocket, unhinged thing that any person operating in good faith would know is going to make a lot of people angry, and then like we'll be suddenly surprised that it like somehow turns into drama, and it's like, well, what did you think was gonna happen? And not even coming from like a respectability politics angle or like tone policing or anything like that, because I know like especially with like being black on that app, like there's a lot of tone that gets misconstrued and things like that, but I'm talking about people that purely will say something to like rile people up and like use that as their hook instead of actually crafting something clever and engaging to start a video. And then they're suddenly like, oh, well, like, why are you all mad at me? Why did this turn into discourse? Why did this turn into drama? And it's like, what do you mean why? Like, you know what you did. And I wish people would just be like a lot more honest with that as well. It's messy, y'all. It's messy. And kind of going along the inherent issues with these platforms, I think the monetization aspect is a big part of it too, especially on TikTok, but on like YouTube and other spaces, just anywhere where you're able to get paid off your work, which I think should be the case. And I think a lot more people should be getting paid a lot more for the valuable content that they're making, whether it is truly like lefty sort of political, like actual pure education sort of things, or more of like the edutainment stuff. I think it all is valuable and all has a place. I think though, with it being this like capitalism driven thing with like the creator rewards program and things like that, there is definitely like mechanisms that kind of encourage people to be a little bit more snappy, a little bit more hostile, get people riled up, because it doesn't matter if people are agreeing with you or like beefing with you in the comments. The more people that are engaging and the more the video blows up, you're gonna get more money. And I think you definitely notice that when it comes around to like TikTok creator payment time, people start dropping hot takes that are a lot more reckless and a lot more messy and are just saying things that like either people are just so truly like delulu, or you just know that they truly like don't even believe what they're necessarily saying, and it's like purely just to like rile people up and get a check and stuff like that. Like there truly is such a like ecosystem with these discourses and like a whole economy to it, because you'll have like one person who makes like a take that like is like the hot take of the week, especially if it's something that's like out of pocket or unhinged. I can't remember if it was like Shaheem or Crutches and Spice or somebody was talking about this, comparing it to like a whale carcass when it dies in the ocean, and like a whale carcass like falling down to the bottom of the floor. Like you have your big creator or whatever, or even like a little creator, whoever is like in the hot seat this week makes the video, and they're the whale carcass that falls to the bottom of the ocean. And then you have all the TikTok yappers and the leftists and the liberals and all the people that want to make the hot takes, and they're like the little fish biting a piece off and make them their own little hot take and reaction videos and things like that, like eating off their little plate or whatever. And again, like I'm someone who's doing this too. There's something that happens and I'm like, oh, I have something I can say about that. I have something I can contribute. And there are like the people that, you know, have something actually interesting to say. And then there's the people that are messy and just want to get in the drama. And then there are the people that like truly just don't care and know it's just like a hot topic that's going to make them some extra money in the creator program. And everybody's kind of like eating and getting their little piece and so on and so forth. So there's like that kind of whole dynamic. And then like these things spill over to Twitter. So the people that are monetized on Twitter, they're making money off the discourse, and the people on Threads, they're posting about it and they're making money off the discourse. And then these things grow and grow and grow. And then all the little like YouTube essayists that are really just like summary channels, they start making videos about it because it's a hot popping thing on there. And it's like this kind of just like this whole ecosystem that's built around like online discourse. And it really like, I don't know, I think it's kind of like taken out a lot of like the good faith engagements with it and kind of just turned it into more of this like sort of cash cow, content cow sort of thing that is devoid of anyone actually like participating in good faith. It's messy. It's so messy. I think lastly, kind of the last thing I want to talk about on that sort of topic too is like the lack of willingness to like meet people where they're at. And I feel like that's kind of sort of what some of the stuff I was talking about before centers around, but I think very specifically like when I mean like meeting people where they're at, like understanding that a lot of people are coming into these sort of topics with like literally no base level knowledge of things. And I find it very interesting that some people will start conversations talking about things that are really important and really interesting, and then people will show up in the comment sections and be like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know about this. And like, not that all people people in the comment sections are like nice and respectful like this. There are definitely a lot of people that go in the comment sections and like demand to be educated or demand answers to things that could be very easily Googled. But also, like, on the other hand, again, as a leftist who should know like the way the internet works and the way misinformation spreads and things like that, I think there are so many times where like people will literally come to like the digital doorstep and be like, hey, I want to learn more about this thing. I want to learn more about your experience, so on and so forth. And like the kind of like flippant, like, oh, well, just Google it. Oh, just look it up. Do your own research. Da, 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 da. And like sometimes I get it, like especially like as a Black person, the number of white people that will make videos and being like, hey, Blacks, I want to learn something and I'm not going to look it up myself. Like, will you teach me? And like, it's like, I definitely get that. But like on concepts that are like a little more complex or like not super easily Googleable, or like, especially if you're someone who's like opening a conversation and wanting to make like educational sort of content or like talk about your experience or things like that, like I find it a little weird, like how dismissive things get sometimes, or like how quick it does just end up like, oh, we'll just Google it. Like, I don't want to explain this to you. Like, it's not my job to educate you. I don't want to do the emotional labor, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, like, then why did you make a video talking about this and trying to relay your experience if you don't want to go deeper than like a 2-minute video? Like, I don't know. And that's kind of like, in some ways I do try to view these things as like conversations, and I do want to like get deeper into things and like share my lived experience and things like that. So like if someone's coming at me with a question, like if it's in good faith and not somebody just trying to like troll me or like rage bait me or things like that, like I love making a part 2, part 3, part 4, like doubling down, especially on things that I'm really passionate about, like COVID or just like my political beliefs or like my queer life or things like that. Like that's why I make videos, because I want to talk to people. And that's largely why I like YouTube so much, because there's just like so much more space to say things. But like, again, talking about like, if we're trying to build community, if we're really trying to like change the world and make things different, we can't just be turning people off to like on their own devices and like to look up some of these sort of things. There is so much just like rampant misinformation online, and especially we're seeing it with like Facebook and X and all these platforms skewing more conservatives and basically like lying down and getting ready to take whatever Trump wants to like deal out to them. Tech companies and digital landscape being so much more like conservative skewing over the last several years. Like, it's probably not in anyone's best interest a lot of times to just tell people to Google things, because they're probably gonna like stumble across some weird like unreliable source that they may not be able to like distinguish against, because again, media literacy, critical thinking is on the downswing. We know that people's like reading levels and the reading comprehension levels are at like a 6th to 8th grade reading level. Like, I think a lot of people like really just truly do not have like proper research skills. So like, if we can be people that are like guiding them towards like proper education and things like that, like I think that is something we should be doing, rather than just, all right, here's like a 2-minute intro to this topic, go figure it out the rest of yourself and hope that you don't fall down a pipeline. Like, I think there are some ways we can be better and do better. Not to say that I'm perfect either. Like, there are definitely videos I've made where I've been like probably a little more riled up than I should be, or like talking about things at a little bit more elevated level than I should be. So like, these are all issues like I'm saying that like I'm someone who participates into, but I do try to like be very intentional about like not kind of getting swept up in like the heat and the passion and anger of it all, and like trying to like engage with people in good faith and like actual human beings that like have a perspective and may have like certain ways that they've gotten to the beliefs they have. I think a lot of the things that like inform the way I think about this stuff too is like, I've had so many friends that are on like varying levels of being in or out of line with my like socio-political beliefs and understanding the way I see the world, especially someone who like I've talked about so much, like growing up in Oklahoma. Like, there are just so many people who just like have never met someone like me, have never heard about any of the ideas that I find so just like inherent to my life, my morals, and how I live and believe and things like that. And like, I really just do try to like engage with people, like they just may never have been exposed to these ideas, or like they just need a couple conversations to like come around. And I've seen that so much in my personal life. I think there's just like a lot of kind of like disposable thinking, and like it's the internet, and like obviously you can't save everybody, and like my block list is long. Like, there are just times where I like don't want to engage, and I would rather just like close a conversation than like get heated and wrapped up in it. But like, I do think it is important to remember that like for the vast majority of interactions we're having online, you're interacting with real people who have actual experiences. And if we are trying to build this new world and trying to build community and trying to like come together, like I think we could be a little bit more tactful, a little bit more like willing to go down to like base level with people and kind of explain things from like a fundamental level, not be so like wrapped up in ego and like being hostile and like trying to dunk on people and own people and make your hot take so you get your like little TikTok check at the end of the month or whatever. I think we can do a little bit better. And I'm saying that as someone, I'm saying I can do better. I'm saying you can do better. I'm saying we all can do better. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about this today. This is something that I could go on forever and ever, but I think I kind of expressed what I wanted to say. Definitely let me know below, especially if you're a creator or someone who's like active in these spaces and kind of engaging. How do you feel about like a lot of the way like ideas are communicated or the way people represent themselves in these leftist spaces? Because again, I do not think it is like purely leftist, but as someone who identifies as that, like this is something I kind of want to like retrospectively look at, especially when like TikTok is looking to be on the chopping block. I'm not fully convinced it's going to be banned.
So it got banned. Well, I love it here.
And I feel like a lot of people are getting extra messy because they do think it's like for sure gonna go away. And I personally think it's gonna be so funny if it ends up not getting banned, and then everyone kind of has to confront like the mess that's been riled up. That's a whole other video. Maybe we'll do a reflection on if the app gets banned or not. We'll talk about all of that because I have so many thoughts there. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give it a like because that does help me out quite a bit. And if you want to come yap with me every single Sunday, hit that subscribe button because I upload at least once a week, sometimes more. Hope to see you in the next video. Thank you to all the new people that have showed up too. Thank you all for coming through, and I will catch you all in the next one. Bye.